This is a cover-up, a media cover-up, and a cover-up specifically of genocide. And that cover-up is absolutely crucial for this genocide being able to happen. Now, two new devastating reports should be front-page news, but they're not, because they detail how a Western ally is committing genocide facilitated by our governments. Now, yeah, sure, we didn't need these reports, as crucial as they are. I'll explain to know that this is genocide. Let me quote. All the indicators of genocidal activities are flashing red in Gaza. This was the conclusion of the president of the International Court of Justice 8 months ago. And before and since then, the evidence of genocide has been absolutely overwhelming. No genocide in history has been so documented as it happened, thanks to the work of Palestinian journalists, many of them brutally maimed or slaughtered alongside their families, including children. The testimonies of survivors, the work of independent agencies and experts, the existence of social media, and frankly, the relentless boasting from the perpetrators, from politicians, officials, generals to soldiers on the ground. And yet from the start, we've seen a deliberate attempt by both Western media outlets and Western politicians, both of which have facilitated this government to suppress and ignore the evidence and lie about it. We'll discuss the latest overwhelming, hideous evidence, but let's hear this recent response from the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer when challenged over genocide.
Mr. Speaker, Article 2 of the United Nations Genocide Convention makes it explicitly clear that genocide is not about numbers, it's about intent. And the intent of the Israeli government and the IDF has been explicitly clear in words and in actions over the past 400 days. More than 45,000 innocent men, women and children killed. On the 28th of October, the Foreign Secretary denied that a genocide was even taking place and suggested that the Israeli army had not yet killed enough Palestinians to constitute a genocide. And last week, the PMQs, the Prime Minister started that he has never referred to the atrocities happening in Gaza as a genocide. Will the Prime Minister share his definition of genocide with this House, and will he state what further action he is prepared to take to save lives of desperate and starving men, women and children, given that we now hold the presidency of the United Nations Security Council?
It would be wise to start a question like that by reference to what happened in October of last year. I'm well aware of the definition of genocide, and that is why I've never described this and referred to it as genocide.
Absolutely grotesque. Aside from his arrogant dismissal of the case for why genocide has been committed, with no evidence offered by him for his conclusion, he segues from a specific question about Palestinian suffering to 7th of October, underlining there is no evidence that Starmer sees Palestinian life as having any meaning whatsoever. Now, this was a genocide, confessed to by its perpetrators from the start. I've just launched a Substack. You can subscribe if you wish at owenjonesjourno.substack.com, with a new post detailing how the Western media systematically covered up the genocidal promises of Israeli leaders and officials from the start. I'll be posting their original work as well as text versions of these videos, which a lot of you have asked for. Now, as for the latest overwhelming evidence on Israel's Western-facilitated genocide against the Palestinian people, there are two chilling reports. One is a 27-page report issued by the United Nations Special Committee to investigate Israeli practices that covers the period between October 2023 and July 2024. It looks at Israel's onslaught against Palestinians across the occupied territories, but it focuses on Gaza. It concludes that the developments in the report that it charts are consistent with the characteristics of genocide. The report notes that the official death toll is likely to be a devastating underestimate, that it could take up to 3 years to retrieve the bodies, and that the decomposition of bodies raises serious health concerns and itself risks further deaths. In looking at the mass destruction of civilian infrastructure, it examines a crucial detail, which most media outlets simply do not even engage in: how artificial intelligence systems relying on mass surveillance are used to swiftly generate tens of thousands of targets, not least at night when those targets, such as, these are human beings, we don't know what these people have done or haven't done because there's no judicial process. They're just they're selected by artificial intelligence. They return to their families, including, of course, their children. And this reliance on AI-assisted targeting means that soldiers can authorize strikes within seconds, with them happening at night, these attacks increasing the risk, of course, of their families being wiped out with them, which has happened over and over again. This is particularly important because the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor has so far focused on the question of starvation, not the bombing campaign. Well, this report estimates it could take approaching half a century to recycle just half the debris produced by Israel's onslaught. The report looks at the mass violent displacement of Palestinians, a deliberate policy of starvation, of course, a deliberate siege on the essentials of life, the war on UNRWA, the main humanitarian agency in Gaza. It details the mass destruction of water, sanitation and hygiene systems, the widespread contamination of soil, of beaches, coastal waters, fresh water, sources, access to clean water, deliberately suffocated, how women and children and newborns have disproportionately suffered, with up to 2 mothers killed every hour and women and girls' access to essential services critically impacted, with pregnant women prevented from getting the crucial nutrition and care and emergency obstetric services they need, horrific circumstances for women giving birth, a surge in stress-induced miscarriages, stillbirths, premature births. It documents the impact of women and girls more broadly because of the destruction of the hospital system, but it also looks at the hundreds of Palestinian women and girls subjected to sexual and gender-based violence by the Israeli state. That includes being targeted, arbitrarily detained and subjected to forced nudity, inappropriate touching, sexual violence, including rape, sexualized torture, threats of rape, psychological violence, online sexual harassment, including degrading photos which are posted on social media platforms. Just worth emphasising at this point, for the Western media and for Western politicians, allegations of sexual violence and rape are only of interest if they can be used to justify portraying Israel's enemies as uniquely barbaric and evil, justifying the genocidal onslaught against Gaza. So where, then, is the outcry about overwhelming and repeated reports of sexual violence and rape against Palestinians? It speaks for itself, doesn't it? Now, we also read here about the enforced disappearance of Palestinian women and children by Israel's military, with mass graves at hospitals with bodies found of women and children who show signs of being tortured and summarily executed. It also specifically details the horrors inflicted on children, from intergenerational trauma to Gaza being a graveyard for thousands of kids. It states, since the beginning of the war, Israeli officials have publicly supported policies that strip Palestinians of the very necessities required to sustain life: food, water and fuel. And indeed how Israel has defied binding orders from the International Court of Justice and Security Council resolutions concluding Israel is intentionally causing death, starvation and serious injury, using starvation as a method of war and inflicting collective punishment on the Palestinian people. And then there is the truly terrifying report by Forensic Architecture, a research agency based at the University of London, bringing together a range of experts. It's entitled A Cartography of Genocide, Israel's Genocide in Gaza since October 2023. They say simply analysis of this conduct reveals the near total destruction of civilian life in Gaza. It examines how the evacuation orders used by the Israeli state, supposedly telling Palestinian civilians to flee to areas classified as safe, have resulted in mass, repeated displacements of the population, often to areas where they then come under attack. This is crucial work because apologists for genocide have often presented these evacuation orders as some sort of humanitarian gesture. Crucially, they conclude, the patterns we have observed concerning Israel's military conduct in Gaza indicate a systematic and organised campaign to destroy life, conditions necessary for life and life-sustaining infrastructure. Now, they use the term genocide as it was originally defined by the Jewish-Polish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, who was influenced by the Ottoman Empire's genocide of the Armenians, growing anti-Semitic persecution, of course, in his lifetime, culminating in the Shoah, the Nazi extermination of Jewish people, amongst other Nazi genocides. As Forensic Architecture puts it, Lemkin saw genocide as a coordinated plan of actions aimed at the destruction of essential foundations of the life of national groups with the aim of annihilating the groups themselves. Let's go through some of their horrible findings. They note how Israel is destroying civilian and agricultural infrastructure to create a buffer zone and so-called raid routes, that is 13 routes from military bases, in what is already a desperately overcrowded strip of land, dividing Gaza up permanently into north and south. That means they've cleared 36% of Gaza of all forms of life for that purpose. How the Palestinian life have been ordered to be squeezed into just 13% of Gaza's land is examined. Bear in mind, Gaza as a whole is only the size of East London, and there was a pre-war population of around 2.3 million, bear in mind. Evacuation orders, that is, demands for all of those areas to be evacuated, covering 84% of Gaza's total area. They look at 346 schools used as shelter. 70% of them were attacked by the Israeli army. All areas, they know, of Gaza have been attacked. No are safe, including those designated as humanitarian zones. The evacuation orders themselves are inconsistent and unclear, forcing civilians to areas they are attacked, they know. Now get this, in terms of making Gaza inhospitable. Now, we've tried many times on this channel, haven't we, to discuss the deliberate starvation of Gaza in terms of aid coming in, but that's only one part of the story, because you've got to factor in the destruction of Gaza's own ability to offer its people the means of survival. This report finds 83% of all plant life in Gaza destroyed. 70% of Gaza's agricultural land, from fields to orchards, destroyed. 47% of groundwater wells and 65% of water tanks destroyed or damaged. The status of another 29% not known. All wastewater and treatment facilities rendered non-functional. All of that paints a very clear message of a deliberate, systematic attempt to make Gaza somewhere that is impossible to sustain life. It does not get more genocidal than that. Another pillar of genocide, of course, has been the all-out war in the medical system, which imposes a daily death sentence on so many, from the injured to the ill to those with serious pre-existing health conditions, with 35 of 36 hospitals rendered out of service at least once. 31 of those hospitals have been directly targeted. 11 of them have been under siege, 5 of them twice. 10 hospitals invaded, 4 invaded twice. In terms of the raw statistics of this assault, we could go on. 70% of shelters containing desperately vulnerable civilians attacked. But also, think about this. 81% of university facilities attacked. 80% of religious institutions attacked. Of all religious institutions, 38% were destroyed, 42% damaged. Most cultural sites destroyed. All of this, of course, amounts to an attempt to erase the culture of Gaza. That itself is core to genocide. So many other attacks, they know. Bakeries, aid personnel, dozens of cases of civilians targeted while seeking aid. Nearly half of all roads damaged. That itself, of course, makes it very hard for aid to get around. The failure of the Western media to give proper, meaningful attention to these devastating facts is itself complicity in genocide. Claims of human shields, for example, make no sense when you detail the apocalyptic level of destruction, and we know there's overwhelming evidence of Israeli forces using Palestinian civilians as human shields. Every accusation, of course, is a confession. Israel has wiped Gaza out, and the Western media has suppressed the truth, whitewashing Israeli crimes and regurgitating Israel's official propaganda. They must be held to account. Do subscribe on the Substack if you wish, Owen Jones, journo.substack.com. Also, I've set up an account on Blue Sky, that's Owen Jones, all one word. Please like and subscribe. Leave your thoughts and comments as ever. You can support the channel at patreon.com/OwenJones84. Listen on podcasts. I'll speak to you soon.